Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Two Trees Podcast. I'm John Dillon. I'm here with Martin.
Hey, all.
And Jacob.
What's up, guys?
And I think we may have done it. We may have broken our 100 reviews on iTunes.
You're saying may have because you haven't actually seen the 100 number, but there's promises. There's some promises out there.
Have been made. I needed 2 more, and I posted on Facebook today, hey, guys, help me out. And people have sworn to me. Well, not really. They did say they were going to, though.
But it might not be too late.
It might not be too late.
You could still be the 100th if you go on and leave us a review.
Was there a
right
promise
now.
made to the 100th? Was there something? I trying to think back.
Eternal bragging rights, not normal bragging rights.
Eternal
bragging rights. I think is what we claimed.
How about you take them golfing?
I can do that anytime. Anytime you guys are willing. I mean, Martin Listener's my name. Look me up. I'm happy to go golfing with you anytime, any place.
I want to know when the first two trees.
I will drive the golf cart.
Are we gonna have like a Two Trees conference, or have just invite people and have live studio, live questions?
Yes, we are going to do something.
I think
like
that'd be a lot of fun.
It's coming. Stay tuned.
All right. I'm curious if you guys think we should do that. Love to hear some feedback on that. Although, I was kind of sad. I only got a couple people pushing back on the podcast a couple podcasts ago. I was hoping to have some good, comfortable,
maybe
good
you were
fun.
just right.
Maybe it was so well put together.
Yeah.
The argument was so well done that they man, I can't argue this. And so I was just waiting. I was waiting patiently. I got a couple really good voice texts, Voxer, and then a couple other messages. But that's it. I wanted some nope. As a matter of fact, today I had my nephew was here. He's like, hey, I listened to the episode with your son in it because I was really excited to hear what he had to say, and he literally said 2 words. I'm like, yep, that's great. And then I listened to the episode. He's listened to the episode. I'm not convinced. I'm like, oh, okay, thank you. Thank you. So we had this fun conversation. But anyway, it was fun. I'm glad I got to do it.
I'm not convinced either, but I love that you guys were bouncing it around. And I think that's part of the fun of
me too.
Just talking about stuff is, in the end, I wasn't there. I don't know.
But that's the best part about this podcast and really the group of guys that we have, that we can just talk about things, and whether we believe it or not, or convinced or not, or convicted or not, or whatever you want to say, it's really opened my mind to so many different possibilities, and I think I'm a better person for it. I mean, my walk with Jesus has grown so much from just being around you guys, you two, and the whole group that we have here together. So if we can bring anybody closer to wanting to pursue that more, then it's a win for me. I think we've gotten so many different comments in the last couple of weeks about that it's been such a shot in the arm for me. It's like, man, is this getting stale? Is this getting old? A year and some change after it? But it's really been a boost to me to hear what you guys have to say about really joining in with the walk together. So I'm happy to hear that.
I agree with that. And I think that I'm always surprised to hear from people, and that people are listening to it and being blessed by it. And I think we're exploring the weird corners of the Bible. So some of the stuff we say is weird. It's just going to be.
And correct.
All of Jacob's opinions are endorsed by Jacob.
They're in my head, yes. I'm like, I'm right. That's great.
Well, what we're talking about right now is this is going to be an ongoing series, and it's going to take as long as it takes, guys. We're talking about how the transition from that Old Testament world into the world of Jesus in the Gospels came about. And the last time we really talked about it, we talked about this emphasis on the broken brotherhood. That is a motif that we find running through the entire Old Testament. And really you find it in its fullest, I think, especially Caleb Lewis would tell you, in Joseph. There's this idea of him being the fruitful branch, the one who forgives those who wronged him and pretty much saves the world, that God uses this man and he lives this Eden-like life, the way of Eden. He is bringing together that which is scattered, and he's bringing hope. And even though he has a right to be angry, he is forgiving. Instead, we have compared to that this way of Babylon that the world hates and wants to devour, wants to use other people to accumulate its own power. And so what we saw last time is that the nation split in half. The priests were supposed to bring unity. They were supposed to bear the names of all the tribes on the stones that they were carrying around with them, at least the high priest was. And what we're going to talk about today is what exactly happens. What is going to bring about the end of the northern kingdom, which they're going to call Israel. And really what I'm going to tell you guys is that it is about this two trees, that there's a way that seems right to a man, and the end thereof is destruction. When we pursue this way of Babylon, this rebellious nature, we pursue our own good at the expense of other people. You've got Cain, who murders his brother. We've got Joseph's brothers who sell him into slavery. It's about how can I manipulate others to make my life better. And we see it around us all the time.
And John, that's such a strong terminology, I think, when you say, how can I manipulate others? Because for me, it's not that people have the intention of going out and say, how can I wrong you so I can be right? Right? And I think that's kind of the part that I really am hung up on, because I don't go around saying, how can I hurt you so I can be better? But what I do say is, how can I be better, even if it means that you have to be hurt for it? And I really want to put that across, because Kristen and I, my wife and I, were talking about it earlier. Is like, I don't think anybody, especially someone that claims to be a Christian, says, I'm really looking to hurt somebody so I can gain. But what they are saying is that I'm going to gain even if I have to hurt somebody to do it.
Right. I think they're asking the same question that Cain did. Am I my brother's keeper? And the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, that's a great question.
You are. And so if you are supposed to be caring for one another, and instead you attempt, maybe not, you wouldn't say hurt, maybe you would say use, the world around me exists so that I can be happier.
Or just disregard somebody's well-being, because it doesn't matter how they are or how they view the world or their eternal life. Like, it doesn't matter about that.
You don't matter to me except when your life impacts me.
That's right.
And I'm willing for you to go through hard times so long as I don't.
And I think that's one of the biggest steps when you go through the Christian walk is, like, first of all, you understand that there are other people out there and that they have feelings. And then you all of a sudden start to realize that it's not about how they can benefit you, but how you can benefit them. And I think that's kind of the step that me personally, am trying to get into. Is like, man, it's eye-opening when you understand that these people are human beings and they're created in God's image, but then also how can you help them flourish and disciple them to move forward?
You know, I think that's true. Most people that I meet wouldn't necessarily come out and say, I'm out to hurt people. But they would tell you that they don't care much.
Right.
For most people, they just aren't interested.
Right.
And so in my mind, it's a neglect of the calling that God has given to you. You are to be a tree planted by the waters. You are a force of the kingdom of God to make the world better, brighter, safer, because you're in it. And the Spirit of God is filling you, and you're growing the fruit of the Spirit. It's love and joy and peace and long suffering. But we feel like God is, he's up there like, wow, you did a good deed. Wow, I'm impressed with you.
Right.
That's what you're made for. You are made to image God. And so the sin that happens in the garden is when mankind decides, no, I am going to rule myself. I will define right and wrong myself.
Isn't it funny that our actions we think should be heralded as like the epitome of Christianity? God's up there saying, like, that's the bare minimum. Like, that's what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And you want a pat on the back for what you should be doing anyway, right? Like, we act like we're these all-time grateful Christians because we put somebody ahead of us one time, and God's saying, that's what you should be doing every day, all the time.
Yeah,
And
we're supposed to spur each other on with our good deeds. And so that's where I'm going to with Jesus, and he's going to call the whole world to live this way. Israel, though, is where it starts. If you're reading the timeline, you've got Abraham and his family. God intended Israel to be an example for the nations. At the Tower of Babel, things went south in a hurry. And all the nations more or less turn their back on God, and they wander off, and they've been wandering ever since. And God moves into that space and makes a new nation. and they're supposed to bear his name. That's what God tells them to do at the mountain. He says, don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. That doesn't mean don't cuss, although I guess that's part of it. It means you represent me. If you're going to take up my name, then you need to represent the kingdom. The high priest is talked about in the book of Exodus, and it describes him as carrying stones, shining stones that have the names of the tribes of Israel in his clothing, in his ephod. And so we have this image that Israel is supposed to be united. They're supposed to be a work against the gods of the nations. But they fail. If you read Judges, it's a mess. If you get into David's life, it's a mess. You get into Solomon's life, it's a mess. Under King Rehoboam, Israel shatters. You've got two nations at odds with each other. You've got Judah in the south, and you've got Samaria, or Israel, in the north. And they are locked into this cycle of pride and hate and mistrust. And today we're going to focus in on the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes that are called Israel. And you got to start with their George Washington. Their first king is a man called Jeroboam. He leads the tribes into independence. But he quickly realizes that so long as people are worshiping at the temple in Jerusalem, that they're going to be called back into unity, to be one people. God was not endorsing Rehoboam's pride. But Jeroboam's giving to him of the nations was, or of the tribes, I don't think was supposed to last forever. It was supposed to draw them back together, and instead they dug into their hatreds and into their racism, and they just kept drifting further and further and further apart. And so he realized that one of the greatest obstacles to maintaining his power, his independence from Judah, was the temple. So long as the people were going up to Jerusalem, where the high priest bore the stones and where God was receiving his sacrifices, they were going to be drawn back to the house of David. And so what he does is he creates his own temples. He gets rid of the priests and he creates his own priests. He dusts off the old golden calves and he makes them again. The spiritual powers of darkness led Israel away from God's intentions for their nations. I think Israel is walking what I'm going to call the way of Babylon. Violence, manipulative power. God sends them representatives. I mean, Elijah, that's a big one. Elisha, Isaiah, Amos. There's loads of prophets. God was talking to them for an incredibly long time. Come back. Reunite. Come back and do what I'm asking you to do. And instead, they worshiped the gods of the nations.
But do you think these people had the intention to get back to being together?
No.
To get back to that? You don't think they at any point were like, we need to figure out a way to get back to square one?
Well, I think there were always people who recognized that that was the goal. And that there would have been people in the north. I mean, all of those prophets, Elijah, Isaiah, those guys, they definitely thought that way. But as far as like, did the nation itself ever come to a joint realization that, hey, I don't know that we're really doing what we're supposed to be doing. To do that, the king would have to give up its power. The families, the princes of the tribes would have to kind of go back hat in hand and say, hey, you know, we'd like back in. Because
when I look at the church today, I feel like we're kind of in the same boat. It's like we need to get back to the way that creation was intended to be. Right? We're trying to get back to the basics, back to square one. And yet anything we try to think and muster up of how to get back there, we fall short on doing because of one way or another. Either we are, you know, instilling power in people that shouldn't be or in groups that shouldn't be or whatever. But for some way, our ministries, our way of thinking falls short of getting back to the way God intended creation to be.
I think when you look at this pattern, like with Cain or with the brothers of Joseph, the first step that's really needed is repentance. You have to recognize that you're on the wrong path, and you have to come back. If Cain had recognized that, it would have been a different story. If Joseph's brothers, you just get this idea that day after day they harbored this hatred, and it grew. I like how the New Testament says, let no root of bitterness grow in you. Bitterness takes root fast, and it spreads all over the place, and it doesn't grow into anything healthy. It's going to divide you. It's going to split you, and you're not going to be able to show this unity and diversity.
I just feel like my limited experience in this ministry and in Christian life, it seems like everybody has the right intentions when they're trying to start something new or trying to spur an upbringing or an uprising in this way of life to get back to the way Jesus wants us to live. It seems like everybody has the right intentions, but all of a sudden then everything starts to fall apart once we start to rely on our ministry or on our thought process or our way of life that we have figured out is the best way to live.
I've been kind of looking in the text, and I'm thinking to myself, why are we dealing with split kingdoms and kings and all this other stuff? I mean, you look at God's design where he wanted to be Israel's king, and he has priests and those who are communicating thereof, and they say, we don't want you, we want a real king, we want an earthly king. And God even warns them, and it's at 1 Samuel 8, and he's going to take your stuff, the best of your stuff, he's going to want your flocks, he's going to want your sons, he's going to want this, we want a king, and he says, when that day comes, this is verse 18 of 1 Samuel 8, you will cry out for relief from the king that you've chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. And you'll find that this is an unfolding of events because they didn't want what God was giving them. And I look at that in the practical side of things. It makes me kind of question, what's the posture, the place, the life, the heart, what he's called us as believers to live and how to live this thing out. And we don't want that way. We want our way. And so this is one of those, this is also a recurring theme of, I think Genesis 11 is another rebellion that takes place. Genesis 3 is a rebellion that takes place. But here we are, and again, just more practical application. I was just thinking about just today how, God has told us to go make disciples, and he's given us this thing of what he wanted us to do as we live this out. I'm like, I don't really want to do that. I want to do something else. But I'm thinking the reason why we have split kingdoms now, we have kings because they decided to deny God as their king. They want an earthly king. Well, that ended up being rough. And God's not up there like, I told you so, but that's exactly what he told them. And here they are divided. They're suffering through all this. And anyway, I was just thinking about how did we get here to this split kingdom? Certainly Solomon was rough, and Rehoboam has issues, and Jeroboam gives them this warning. But why do we even have Solomon in the first place? David who wants to build a temple and all this other stuff.
Solomon fails. I know we talk about Solomon and we say, he's the wisest man ever. Well, that just makes it worse because Solomon's life ends in idolatry.
Yeah.
And it's not. And if you're interested in this, you can go back. We've actually talked about this in previous episodes. Probably when you were building your kitchen and no longer cared about me as a person.
But I want to build onto that because I view this all the time in my son, and it's so interesting to me. Like it's something ingrained within humanity, or is it a choice that we really have to make even from a young age? Because there's so many times when I tell my son, don't touch that hot stove. Don't touch that hot stove. And what's the first thing he does? He reaches his hand out like, oh, I'm going to touch it. I'm going to touch it. But there's something about it where it's like, don't do this. I know what's right for you. And yet he has to figure it out for himself. I will even tell him ahead of time, like you're saying in 1 Samuel, when you touch that stove and it burns you, I'm not going to help you. Like you're on your own, buddy. That's what God's saying to them in 1 Samuel. Like when you want a king and it blows up in your face, it's on you. And I say the same thing to my son who's 5 years old all of the time, constantly, all the time. And yet he burns his hand time and time and time again. And so I'm thinking, is this something that we have control over even from a young age? Or is this a maturity process that we have to get through? And then all of a sudden, once we have gotten to this place, we can say, okay, God, I really surrender to you and I'm going to obey you because I know that you know what's right for me.
Well, it's probably a little bit of both, I would think. Our nature is sinful. No one ever taught me to be grouchy or mistrust or those kinds of things. I am naturally
just
selfish.
Happens.
I never taught my son how to be sneaky. He just is. And Israel is kind of reaping what they've sowed, but God has also given them a promise that through the house of David, he's going to bring about ultimate victory here. And they looked at that and they said, no, we're going to pick a different guy. And they raise up Jeroboam. And Jeroboam's first act is to build golden calves. That ought to have been a gigantic red flag for everybody who was, well, our taxes are lower, but now we have to worship these other gods. And so, we got to make a decision here. And things continue based on violence and mistrust. There are no godly kings in the north at all. Judah has some stinkers. They've got some winners, but they've got some stinkers. But the north is completely devoid of this. And so what you find is the first king, Jeroboam, even though he is a powerful man, he doesn't create a lasting dynasty. He is going to get into trouble right away with the golden calf and the prophet who comes before him. But when he passes the kingdom on to his son, Nadab, Nadab is murdered along with his entire family. And his power went to whoever could take it. And that seems to be the pattern that Israel operates under throughout their entire history. It's survival of the fittest. It's whatever politician could manipulate the most people. It's whatever general had the most swords. It's whatever person or tribe or prince had the most support. There are two dynasties that have a semi-long run. Omri and Jehu exist with, they passed their kingdoms on for a little while, but for the most part, Israel's princes are very comfortable with murder and assassination. It becomes the hallmark of their nation, especially as you get towards the end of their story. It begins to spiral faster, 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 more and more depraved. King Zechariah rules for 6 months.
It's a long stretch.
And someone bumps him off. His assassin is a guy called Shalom, and he declares himself to be king, and he rules for a whole 1 month. I mean, some people probably didn't even know they had a new king by the time that one was gone. This is murder. This isn't fair elections. This isn't, hey, we'll trust the system. Let's give them a while. This is, if you can take it, do so. This is violence. This is mankind seeing and taking, that old Eden motif. The guy who murders Shalom is a guy called Menachem. And Menachem manages to pass the kingdom on to his son, Pekahiah, who rules for 2 years. And then he's killed and replaced by another guy called Pekah. And this guy must have been pretty ferocious because he manages to hold on to the kingdom for 20 years. And then he's killed by a guy called Hoshea. And that's the end of their kingdom. It is murder, 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 murder. Assassin, 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 take it and keep it. It is a spiral of blood. This hardly reminds me of Eden. This isn't the way of Eden. This is the way of Cain. This is the way of Babel. Am I my brother's keeper? And the kings of Israel would say no. The kingdom exists to give me things.
It's so funny how you mentioned that it started to spiral into this way of violence and this thought process of, if I can take it, then I can have it, type of mentality. And I always try to think about things through the two rulers or the two measuring sticks. One is God's measuring stick, and one is mankind's measuring stick. Mm-hmm. And I've definitely find myself thinking more on mankind's measuring stick. It's like, how famous am I? How powerful am I? How strong am I? This way compared to how meek am I? How much am I willing to surrender myself to somebody else? And that's God's measuring stick. And you can see how Israel's thought process really changed from God's measuring stick to mankind's measuring stick. And that's why it accelerates in violence, and it accelerates in this passion for power and this drive to try to take over. And that's the thought process that I have to go through on a daily basis. And I try to remind myself constantly, like, it's okay to lose, quote unquote, lose in the view of mankind, as long as I'm winning for the kingdom. And trying to really balance myself out. It's like, do I need that promotion? No, I don't. If the person ahead of me is going to know Jesus and we're going to live forever in God's kingdom, then I want them to succeed over me. I want to lose to that person if I'm going to get them eternal gain and glory.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense to me, and that's well said. I think in the end, it has to do, and you and I have talked about this before, is what do we do with power when we have it? Do you lift up those around you?
You're right.
Or do you wield your power to make your life better at the expense of others? Are you your brother's keeper? Or you can ask Pilate's question, and that's, what do I have to do with this man? I'm going to wash my hands. Is this really my problem? Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. What is truth after all? I mean, he's backpedaling as much as he can. And I think a lot of Christians would be very comfortable with this. When we have power, we are quick to excuse ourselves and our actions because we had a plan.
And I know I'm going to butcher this, but in the New Testament, it talks about when you are connected to the root or when you are connected to the vine, that you are more willing to give up of yourself for your neighbor. And when you become disconnected from that, you start to take over and you start to view yourself from the landscape of mankind, from the ruler, from the measuring stick of mankind, which is what's happening in Israel. The farther they get away from the vine, the more likely they are to murder this guy so I can be the guy.
Yeah, the Bible uses several motifs to talk about this. And my favorite one, obviously, is the garden motif. An apple tree grows apples. You can tell what kind of tree it is by the fruit it puts out. They'll recognize you. If you're a bad well, you've got bad water. Another way that it talks about it, though, is through the image of shepherding. And this is kind of interesting to me because it goes back to that Cain and Abel mentality. One of them is a gardener, and the other is a keeper of herds, someone who is shepherding. And this is actually not just an Israelite thing. This is a way that most of the ancient cultures talked about kings. If you've ever read the Epic of Gilgamesh, it calls Gilgamesh, he's the king of Uruk, and it says he is the king of Uruk, the guide of the teeming people. It is he who is the shepherd of Uruk, the sheepfold. And so there it describes a shepherd, Gilgamesh, and the sheep are his people, and they exist to fatten the shepherd. I'm going to fleece the sheep. I'm going to use these people to get what I want. The Egyptians also did this a couple times. The pharaohs are referred to as the shepherd of the upper Nile. And what they mean is that this person is in power. He has the authority to direct where we go. And so the prophets of Israel use this same image that the Sumerians would have been familiar with, that the Egyptians would have been familiar with, a shepherd. And probably the most famous psalm of all is the 23rd. The Lord is my shepherd. What we're saying is, you are my king. My loyalty is to you. And so God has also placed other shepherds in our life. In the book of Isaiah 56, 11 through 12, there's something that's pretty interesting to me. This is a prophecy to the northern tribes. Martin, would you read that?
The dogs have a mighty appetite. They never have enough, but they are shepherds who have no understanding. They have all turned to their own way, each to his own gain, one and all. Come, they say, let us get wine, let us fill ourselves with strong drink, and tomorrow will be like this day, great beyond measure.
So did you notice that there's not one shepherd here? There's lots of them. There are many shepherds, and they have no understanding. They have all turned to their own way, each one to his own gain. By the way, if you've read Paul in Romans, this ought to be ringing a bell for you. What it's describing here is a nation where every man defined right and wrong for themselves. And what they pretty much said is, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Everything's going to be fine. Let's do it our way. And God calls them out and says, listen, you have no understanding. You have turned to your own way, meaning you've rejected mine. This is two trees. The Lord said, do not eat from this tree, and you decided, I'll decide what's right and what's wrong. Remember, Abel, he's a keeper of sheep. Moses finds his place in the wilderness because he defends the shepherdess, and then he married her because he's no dummy. And then we've got David, who's famous for tending sheep when the kingship comes to him. This is a prophecy from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37, verses 24 through 25. Jacob, would you take that one?
My servant David shall be king over them.
Over who?
Israel.
Yeah, over all of you.
Yeah.
There's an intended king here. Go ahead.
And they shall all have one shepherd.
How many shepherds?
Just one.
Well, but I didn't vote for him. You know, this is one of those Monty Python moments. No, God selected this. This isn't, well, I think I could do it better. I'll take it. This is mine. God's intention is for the house of David to rule a united nation. Keep going.
They shall walk in my rules and be careful to obey my statutes. They shall dwell in the land that I give them to my servant Jacob, where your fathers lived. They and their children and their children's children shall dwell there forever, and David, my servant, shall be their prince forever.
God intended Israel to be a united family under the house of David. Now, a reader of the book of Genesis might be surprised by that, because the good guy in Genesis seems to be Joseph. You would assume that this is the guy that the Messiah is going to come from. And Joseph's children, the tribes that come from him, Ephraim and Manasseh, are pretty much the leaders of the northern tribes. They're the big ones. Instead, the kingship goes to Judah and Judah's house. And Judah is the one who betrays Joseph. He's the last guy you would expect for God to move the kingship to. That's unexpected. What it is redemption. It's God weaving this redemptive story throughout history, and mankind can't see beyond the present. We don't understand what God is doing, and so we decide to fix it for him. We have this idea of how things ought to be, rather than admitting that God may know more than we do. A beautiful place to see this is in the genealogies of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. In the Gospel of Matthew, you're going to find three women. You've got Tamar before her, you've got Rahab, you've got, I think Ruth is mentioned there, and Bathsheba. And these are unexpected heroines in the story. Rahab is not even Jewish. She's from Jericho. These are not the people that you would expect to find. What God is doing is he's saying, listen, these people's lives mattered. I'm going to do something unexpected. I'm going to bring about unity from diversity. It isn't just this one house that I'm going to bless. Abraham was supposed to be godly, that's true, and he was going to reap benefits, that's true, but he was to be a blessing to the nations.
You know, it's funny. We just watched a movie with my son, Angels in the Outfield, which I'm sure you've all
Classic.
seen.
Oh, yeah. I'm flapping my arms.
That's
no one
right.
can see me here.
But the young kid that's in the foster home is JP, and he has a famous line that he says throughout the movie where it says, "It could happen," and he always says it with an upbeat, optimistic tone. And when I'm talking about Jesus referring to needing to be like children to enter the kingdom of heaven, and it's just that childlike faith that JP has that like it could happen, and these miraculous, unbelievable things. And somebody says like this will never work, and JP says it could happen. And that's just what is reminded when we're talking about this, is how much we try to control the situation that we're in. And this is just our lives. One person, one menial little thing that is trying to control what's going on in our lives when God is working with the kingdom and working with eternity and trying to figure this out. And it's like, if God can handle all of this, don't you think he can handle the little problem that you're going through? And if we looked at God and said, God, I believe it could happen. The same way that JP's saying with the Angels winning the pennant or not. And we did that with our own lives, with our own struggles, with our own things that we got going on. And we just said, God, I believe it could happen because you are who you said you are. It's like, man, that's a big thing to get from a movie from the 90s.
No, I love it. It comes down to loyalty. God, you're in charge of this. And I've heard what you've said, and you've said it's going to come. The Messiah is going to come. The house of David is the way. And the North abandoned the house of David.
I think of Mary, right? The mother of Jesus. Like it's 400 years before anything happens, and all of a sudden the angel appears to her, and she's just like, yeah, I believe this was going to happen. And
maybe the most beautiful example of faith in the New Testament is the Magnificat, is Mary talking there. But this is going to become super important to how the New Testament plays out. Because by the time you hit the story of the New Testament, no one cares about the house of David. No one's looking to David for rulership. And you might wonder, how did that happen? Well, it's going to happen slowly, and this is the first piece. These 10 tribes spin off, and they create their own kingdom. Jesus is coming, though. Listen to what Jesus says in the Gospel of John, chapter 10, verses 7 through 11.
So Jesus again said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and life abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep.
So it's a beautiful picture, and you've probably seen loads of pictures of Jesus as a shepherd. But this has Old Testament connections. He's claiming to be a king here. He is saying, remember how the others failed? I am what you have been waiting for. I am the promised one. And how do you know that I am a good shepherd? What does a good shepherd do? He wields his power for the benefit of others. He is a servant. It's not about manipulating. He says that when the others came, they came to steal, kill, and destroy. They were after their own gain. But I have come for you, and I'm going to wield my power and lift all of mankind up with me. There's going to be a rescue. How is it that got lost from David till the coming of Jesus the Messiah? Well, one of the first pieces is the north abandons the kingship of David. They no longer care. They are not looking to the house of David to be anything to them. In fact, the northern kingdom rejects not just David, but they reject the temple of the Lord. They rejected the Levites. They rejected their priestly duty. And on top of it all, they most especially rejected the house of David. They looked for any means of retaining power, and it led to their destruction. The kings of Samaria connected the temple in Jerusalem to the house of David. They are never going to be supportive of this. A big part of the rivalry that exists between the Samaritans and the Jews in the Gospels has to do with the temple because it's connected to the house of David. They allowed their hatred for one man and his family to drive them far from the will of God for themselves. And so I know I'm covering a ton of history here, but this is going to be really important if you're trying to understand what's the deal with Samaritans. Why is there a problem going on here? It goes back to the fall of the northern kingdoms. Is this making any sense to you guys? Mm-hmm. Okay. So when Menahem is ruling in Samaria, this is the end of their story. This is how it all breaks down. The Assyrian Empire was the big dog. They were absorbing territory, and they were keeping power. They were everyone was afraid of these guys. And when they moved into Israeli territory, Menahem paid them an enormous amount of treasure, bowed his knees, and said, please go away. I will acknowledge you as my overlord. I am no longer an independent power. I'll be a vassal of Assyria, but leave me my kingdom. And so Menahem becomes what we would call a puppet king. He still has the title. He's called king, but this power is an illusion. And he rules for years with the power of Assyria to shield him. And when he dies, he passes the kingship on to his son, Pekahiah. And he doesn't rule very long, just a couple of years. And one of his generals murders him. He gets a whole group of soldiers, and they march up to the palace, and they kill him. And they claim the throne for themselves, or for himself. Now, you would assume this is it. The bad king's been overthrown. Everything's all right. Maybe the houses are going to come back together. Maybe Israel's going to look back to the house of Judah. Maybe they're going to remember God's will. Instead, what you have is no one has any intention of reuniting with Judah. No intention of returning to Jerusalem. Instead, they want to rule for themselves. Now, as you can imagine, when the Assyrians hear that Pekahiah has been murdered, their puppet king has just been killed, they're less than pleased with this. This is going to trigger really the end of their story. This comes from 2 Kings 15:29, and I'll read it just because it has weird names, and I don't want you guys to hate me.
Thank you.
Okay. So the Assyrian king, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and captured Ijon, Abel-Beth-Maachah, Janoah, Kadesh, Hazor, Gilead, and Galilee, and all the land of Naphtali. And he carried the people captive to Assyria. This is the first time that a power has come into Israel and taken captives like this. Now, did they take every single Jewish person living in these cities? No. Instead, they took the powerful. They took the leaders of these families. They took the princes. They took the educated. They took the skilled in a particular craft. Maybe if there was a blacksmith, that guy's coming with us. This guy's a good shipbuilder. You're coming with us. They went through and they took who they wanted. And so all of a sudden, those shepherds that the Bible was talking about before, who thought nothing's ever going to happen to us, we're just going to do whatever we want as long as we want, it's going to be fine, God has sent them into exile. So the people who are left, who didn't get taken into captivity, they're a little upset about this. This is not good. And so they became angry with Pekah, and a conspiracy of the nobles, and apparently the Assyrians as well, is hatched, and it results in the murder of this guy, and their last king's name is Hoshea. And this is where the story is going to come into play. So this is 2 Kings 17, 4 through 6.
But the king of Assyria found treachery in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So king of Egypt, and offended no tribute to the king of Assyria.
No, offered no.
Oh, he offered no tribute to the king of Syria.
So all of a sudden, let me break that down for you. That's Bibleese for Hoshea looked around and was like, why do I want to work for the Assyrians? I'll work for Egypt instead. I'll join them and we'll overthrow the Assyrians together. And this is going to go very badly. Keep going.
As he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria invaded all the land and came to Samaria. And for 3 years he besieged it. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria, and he carried the Israelites away to Assyria and placed him in Halah, and on the harbor, the river of Gazan, and in the cities of the Medes.
So what happens is it all happens again. There's a second exile that takes place here. The Assyrians come, they break down, they besiege the city of Samaria, and the king is captured. He's bound up. They shut him up and put him in prison. And the leaders, the princes of the north, are dispersed. Now, many people seem to think that they just disappeared. That's not at all what happened. We know quite a bit about these guys. We know where they went. They become part of the Assyrian Empire. And just like people are brought into Israel, there are these people in other places, and they're going to come back and forth throughout the story. So we'll get into them a little bit later, but they're not nearly as lost as some people seem to want them to be. And so what you've got here, though, is the power structure of Israel is completely upended. All the guys who were in power are gone. They are taken away, and they are brought to these places far away from home. That's the end of the kingdom. There is no more king in Israel. Listen to how Hosea describes this. Now, he's not going to say Israel. He's going to use the name of one of Joseph's sons, Ephraim, which was a very large tribe. But listen to how he describes the fall of the kingdom of Israel. This is Hosea 4, 17 through 19.
Ephraim is joined to idols. Leave him alone. When their drink is gone, they give themselves to whoring. Their rulers dearly love shame. A wind has wrapped them in its wings, and they shall be ashamed because of their sacrifices.
Now, Ephraim is a son of Joseph, but something very odd is mentioned in this prophecy. We've been talking a lot about the earthly politics. We've been talking a lot about the kings of Assyria. We've been talking a lot about the kings of Israel, but nothing that is happening in the human world is not also being impacted by the supernatural world. And when the Bible tells us that Israel's kingdom is taken away, the reason that it gives is not Assyrian power. The reason that it gives is not the kings of Israel were just stupid and they lost everything. The reason that Israel is sent into exile, the reason their kingdom is taken away, is because of idolatry. It is because they are worshiping the gods of the nations. Now, look at verse 17. You see how that starts? If you've got your Bible out there, you should be looking at this. Ephraim is joined to who?
Idols.
To idols. Now jump down to verse 19. A ruach has wrapped them in its wings. That word for wind is the same word for spirit. Something has got hold of them. They are wrapped in their sins. There are spiritual enemies that were involved with the golden calf, that were involved in the rebellion against David, that were involved in all of these stories that we've been talking about. It isn't just earthly warfare, it's supernatural warfare.
Does that kind of go back to the two measuring sticks like I mentioned earlier?
Yeah, it absolutely does.
That God's measuring stick and mankind. And I think the spiritual warfare that we go through on a daily basis, or whenever you're feeling it, is these spirits or these supernatural beings are trying to get you to focus more on the earthly measuring stick. And they're trying to get you to say, look how you can succeed and how you can be somebody in this world. Or look at where you're failing and how you can change that into success. Instead, God's just saying, I've already told you how to succeed. I've already told you what you need to do to be successful and to reign eternally in this. And they're saying, no, look over here at where your shortcomings are.
That's right.
And look where you're not really measuring up in the world and how you can change that. And in fact, I can maybe help you with that, right? Like
in the ancient world, they would have seen this as, I don't want God to be my God. I'm going to look to these others as my protectors. Mm-hmm. And God destroys them. They are not able to protect Israel from what's coming. The Lord brings judgment on them. Now, today, where people, especially here in the West, are much more anti-spiritual, we don't even give authority over to the spirits. We just say, I'll do it myself. I don't need God to tell me what to do. I'll take care of it. And then we're shocked to death when our life isn't success. And I've defined success as knowing the will of God and doing it. But the world is going to fail. The powers, the princes of this world are going to fail. And no matter what spirits Israel was calling out to, they were unable to stop the judgment of God from coming on Israel.
I just keep thinking of how God's created humanity in his image to rule, and there's always been this option back to the Garden of Eden, and we tend to follow our desires, like animals. Mm-hmm. But I keep seeing here that they continue to be shuffled around. It's like they're cattle. It's like
sheep.
Yeah. It's interesting how they've become what they have chosen, what they're reacting to. They aren't who God's created them to be. They decided to follow their urges, their desires, all of which are not what God wants for them. And because of that, this is the result of it. I guess I look at this whole thing, and a lot of people look at that God as a God of wrath and all those kinds of things, kind of a main attribute, but it's one of those like, I don't want this for you. I mean, but when you keep choosing to jump into the fire, there's going to be burns that happen. It's just going to take place in your life. Like I keep rescuing you out. I'm showing you that I'm a good God, but yeah, I was looking at the idea of them carried away. I was like, it's like a bunch of cattle moving from one space to the next under different rulership, under different shepherding, and not all miserable the whole time. And I'm sure that I'm hoping there was some kind of memory of what it could have been like or what it should have been like. The stories that were passed down of a God that was good, that brought him to the promised land, and how we rebelled against him. But here they are and continuing in their rebellion.
And that goes back to the thought earlier of like my son, when I tell my son what is right and what to do, and he decides not to do it.
Yeah.
But it's like, how many times we got to go through these scriptures and understand God is doing exactly what you're telling.
Yeah.
It's like he's not a God of wrath. He's not a sledgehammer in the sky, like you said on my podcast one time. But he's trying to get these people to do what is right for them because he knows what is right. And yet when we go through this and we see this, it should be easier for us because we have all these examples of how they screwed it up and how we should be able to get right back into what God wants us to do. And yet it seems like we're farther away than they ever were.
One of the things that I really like about the direction you guys are going, because it fits totally with the scripture, is that people want to say, and that's how the tribes disappeared. They don't disappear. No. Some of them obviously are absorbed into the nations, but many of them kept their Jewish identity, and God is not done with them. They come back into this story. Mm-hmm. The Lord is forgiving. He is pushing on. Yep. They never hit a point where God says, listen, I'm no longer interested in you. I'm no longer interested if you repent, it doesn't, like, the Lord values them. And they're part of this story, whether they want to be or not. They've called on the darkness to protect them, and it fails them. The reason that a politician reading this story, we would look for an earthly cause. The book of 2 Kings, though.
Well, before we get into that's such a fantastic point. I think we need to just highlight that further. My wife mentioned something about the covenant of marriage. And, my wife and I have been married 8 years. And 8 years ago when we got married, we had no idea the faithfulness that God had for us in a marriage. We tied a knot together with 3 strands, which is me, her, and God. And we were like, oh, yes, God's going to be in our marriage and yada, yada, and blah, blah, blah. But it's like through the years, we've really figured out the faithfulness of God. That no matter what we do, that he's going to be there. And when we signed that piece of paper, we were signing a covenant with an almighty creator that he's going to be there and willing to work through our marriage through its ups and downs. And like that's something that we can't even fathom. We've been together 8 years, which is great, but it's not 50 million years or whatever. But it's something that I've come to terms with, that even though we have been unfaithful to God, like these people you're talking about, he's never given up on us. And in fact, he's always there no matter what we're going through. And that's so crazy that we're talking about that through the nations of Israel, that even though it seems like they disappear or they go around, that God still got them at the forefront of his mind. And it's the same with our marriage, and it's the same with any covenant and anybody that draws into a relationship with him, that no matter what we do, no matter what we say, he's always there and faithful to us. And I think that's something that always needs to be said.
And I think I'd like to highlight something else that's there. It's easy for me as a Bible student to get wrapped up in the meta-narrative, into this big, sweeping God's plan for the nation. But the nation is the individual souls. It's the people. And God is faithful to them, even while they're in exile, and even while they're rebelling. And boy, are they not done rebelling. It's going to carry on for quite some time. You don't hit a part in the New Testament where God is like, go and preach in Judea, but let's skip Samaria because we don't like those guys, and go to the uttermost parts of the earth. No, the gospel is preached. The call for family is brought to them. They are... you look at Jesus, he goes through Samaria. These are the descendants of these people. They didn't all go into captivity. A lot of them did. The ones with power and money in particular, which was shocking to them, I'm sure. But a lot of the regular people were just regular people, and their lives kept on rolling.
I think we think of the faithfulness of God as saying that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us, right? That even though we weren't in accordance with God's plan, that he still was willing to die for us. But God is faithful even when we are in a relationship with him. Even when we say that we are Christians and then we're trying to do our best to get with him, he still is faithful through our ups and downs. And that's something that I really think should be said anytime that you have the opportunity to say it, because there's people out there that are worrying about their relationship with God, and I didn't read my Bible, or I'm starting to get away from the vine or whatever. But God is always faithful, and he always will be faithful, and that's one of the biggest things that we can't comprehend on earth is why somebody that has all this power and all authority would stick with you individually and stick with you as a nation.
And that's what I'm trying to talk about from the beginning. There are 2 ways here. There's a way of Babylon that says wield power for yourself. And then there's the way of Eden that sees power as a means of blessing those around them. This is what we're talking about. So when the book of 2 Kings talks about the destruction of the kingdom, it does so in supernatural terms. It does not see Assyria as an inevitable invader. Instead, it tells us the reason Israel fell is because of their idolatry. This is 2 Kings 17, 7 through 18. And this is we're kind of wrapping it up. We're going to go a little bit long, and I don't care. I care a little bit, but not a whole lot. Would one of you guys pick it up?
And this occurred because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods.
Bada boom, bada bing, there it is. Why are they in exile? Why did the kingdom fail? Not because Judah was a stinker, not because their kings were bad. The reason is because they are fearing other gods. Not fearing in a negative, but they're honoring other gods. Keep going.
Verse 8, and walked in the custom of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel, and in the customs of the kings of Israel they practiced.
So they drive out the earthly Canaanites. They drive out the giants. They drive out all these people, and then they turn right around and worship the gods that are still there. The territorial spirits that these people were honoring, they adopt as their own gods. They simply replace one evil for another. Let's keep going.
Verse 16, and they abandoned all the commandments of the Lord their God, and made for themselves metal images of 2 calves. Oh, word. And they made an Asherah, and worshipped all the hosts of heaven, and served Baal.
The host of heaven. That's the fallen host. That's the watchers. That's the darkness. That's the princes of the darkness. They served Baal. Verse 17.
And they burned their sons and their daughters as offerings, and used divination and omens, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them out of his sight. None was left but the tribe of Judah only.
So all their power is broken.
That's sad.
This is what happened. Now you would assume that it would be the other way. That the tribe, I mean, there's 10 of us and only 2 of them down there. So obviously we're stronger than they are. But the kingdom of Judah outlasts the 10 northern tribes. If you're counting warriors, the north had way more. If you're counting money, the north had way more. If you're looking at good farmland, the north had way more. They have all the things that are needed to be successful except for the blessing of the Lord. They abandoned the commandments of the Lord their God, and they served the host of heaven. They served Baal, and God breaks their power. He preserves them as a people, but he takes away the stick that they're beating their brothers with. When you read this story, it's more than just history. It has practical application for ourselves as well. But it is important, if you're going to read your gospel and understand, why is no one looking to the house of David? Why is there this awkwardness between Samaria and Judah? There is history here. And Israel is the first to fall, but they're not the last. Judah is going to run right after their brothers and sisters here. And the story is going to continue. We're going to look next time at what happens to Judah. But it's kind of a downer. Just letting you know. It's not going to be positive.
Spoiler.
But there are really exciting pieces of it. You've got Daniel, who is going to, I mean, we're still talking about stuff Daniel said and did, that even in exile, God is going to preserve his people. And this story is going to get, I think it's fascinating. And so I hope that this is helping you understand the timeline. But I hope most of all, it's helping you to see that Jesus is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, mighty and awesome. I said I would go long, but we landed it on time. Just saying.